Thanks for watching Slice of Sci-Fi. I'm Noah Richmond,
And I'm Lewis Howley.
and so we are discussing part two of the Dune movies, the ones that were shot by director Denis Villeneuve. Um, this would be the 2024 Dune release. Um, how long has it been, Lewis, since you saw part one?
I would say it has almost been 3 years to the day. I think I
Uh-huh.
saw it in March of 2021, but I would have to check the release date to see if that was accurate. But I do believe it was the spring that I saw it in of 2021. And that was the year also it was nominated for an Oscar for Best Film.
So, seeing it with the gap, did you feel it took some adjustment to get back into the world building that was created, or do you think part two did a sufficient job bringing you right back up to speed and taking you right into it?
I think that one of the interesting aspects of that question is that I realized how much buy in I had from the first movie into the depiction of the characters by the actors from the first one. I was skeptical at first when I heard that Timothy Chalamet was going to be Paul Atreides because I did not think that he was substantial enough to portray a heroic figure like that. And but I have to admit, as the movie progressed and he faced trials, I think it's almost as if he grew into the role as an actor, and the other portrayals were equally good. I had no difficulty transitioning into this second part; it was seamless to me, and the only question was how well the rest of the book would be portrayed by Villeneuve.
Yeah. For myself, I actually was fortunate enough to catch the theatrical re-release of Dune that they had done about a week prior to my catching the screener of two. So I really, even though I wasn't able to see them back to back, which would have been ideally how I would have liked to have seen it, I saw them fairly close together. So it was a pretty easy adjustment to get into the flow with that. Um, so, and I think what I'm going to say in terms of my experience of these Dune films is and again, this is probably enhanced by the fact that both times that I saw them in a theater. Um, but my experience of them was that I really felt there was something about the world building, something about Villeneuve's style that he took with these films, combined with the Hans Zimmer soundtrack that I just find completely hypnotic and immersive. Like when I watch it, I just want to lay back and just get sucked into it. And so much so to the point that it's almost a little difficult for me to critique or review these films because I don't want that part of my brain going on while I'm watching them. I just want to get immersed in it. I don't want to have to sit there thinking about, well, they could have done this, they could have done, like I want to just go with it. So um, that would be, the first thing I would have to say in terms of my experience of the gap between the films and also just, you know, what my overall hit is coming out of them is I just find the world building so engrossing that I almost don't even want to pick it apart too much.
Well, I will say that I agree with you on that. And I think it's a tribute to Frank Herbert's ability to tell a story and to world build. as much as it is to Villeneuve and bringing it to the big screen. And I, like all good stories, you don't want them to end. You want to see the continuation. And for me, I want instant gratification. Like we've heard that there may be a trilogy related to these two Dune movies. And if there is a third film, I would like it to be out tomorrow so I could enjoy it. But unfortunately, I'm going to have to wait in time and space for that to occur. Um, I read a comment that Denis Villeneuve thought that he conceived of it almost as a war movie. And I will say that those aspects, the visual effects of the battles and the takedowns of Harkonnen machinery were just beautifully filmed. Great visual effects. Um, and the timing and the editing of those scenes was almost perfect in conveying a revolution. And I thought to myself, this movie is almost a primer for revolution, how to stage a successful revolution. And in fact, that's part of one of the plots of Dune, the book. And but it really struck me watching this film that we were seeing all these pieces being laid, including the religious aspect.
So, okay, so having gotten everything that we just said out of the way, we are here to review the film. So, could you say a couple, some things that you can really point to that you really liked about the film that you thought it really did well?
Well, one of the things that struck me, and this might not be one of the things the film did well, but I realized that this whole story of Paul Atreides becoming the Muad'Dib and the Messiah, as portrayed by the Fremen lore, essentially we're seeing like the fulfillment of religious prophecy. And to some extent, especially we see it in the film, which I think was very good, well portrayed, that you have Fremen who are skeptical, but then you have Fremen who are fundamentalists and totally believe the prophecy and, are with Paul from the get go. And the others have to be won over slowly but surely. And I thought to myself, are we really watching the creation of a cult? And are we buying into a cult by watching this film and thinking, oh, this is how it's supposed to go, and because in many ways it's almost like, for lack of a better word, a jihad that Paul Atreides is leading on behalf of the Fremen and their religion against the Harkonnens or anyone who would occupy Arrakis. And that really struck me. I thought, wow, that was something I had never thought about, either in reading the book or in watching the first film. But it came to me really strongly. I thought that another thing I thought that was excellent was Austin Butler as Feyd-Rautha. I thought, boy, there's someone who's born to that part. He looked the part, he portrayed the part, and I'm watching Masters of the Air now on Apple TV, in which he's an actor. And I mean, he came out of nowhere to me from Elvis. And now I've seen him in two other productions. But I'm very impressed with that. Um, Another thing I think it did very well, besides the battle sequences, were the Bene Gesserits. I liked also Princess Irulan's comments throughout the film. I thought they were not intrusive, but really contributed to the flow of the narrative when she would appear on screen and talk about what was going on. And so those were all positives for me.
You do mention that you liked the portrayal of Feyd-Rautha. Uh, how did you feel about the Harkonnens all being, skinheads, all being cue balls?
Well, one could argue if Paul Atreides is leading a cult, perhaps that's a cult of its own kind. Uh, you know, uh, but it was consistent. I'll say that. And I don't know that I've ever seen Dave Bautista with hair, but Stellan Skarsgård is another story as Baron Harkonnen. And but and I thought the costumes were excellent as well. That they were very good, and I loved the sandworms and the traveling on the sandworms, which can look kind of dopey sometimes. But I'm thinking of the first Doom picture now. But here, I thought it was very organic.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, for me, I'm somewhat rehashing what I've said in terms of what I like, which is just the immersiveness, the world building, um, the way the soundtrack brings you into it, the visual and the sound effects, um, and that the way it's all put together uh, really just takes you into the story and just sort of sweeps you away into this epic kind of fantasy. So I guess I would also say that I like how it's able to capture, like David Lynch did, a sort of played up the weirdness of Dune in in certain ways, and in sort of the experimental approach that he took with some of what he did with his Dune. And I think this one manages to do this as something similar in terms of being very, I don't, what's the word? It's not exactly non-lineal, but uh, it's not something we encounter in our day to day. There's an artistic quality to it that is intentionally strange, um, but it manages to do that and still tell a coherent story, which is where this one winds up being a success. Is that it has that strange world, almost surrealistic quality, and yet still manages to tell a story that takes you from point A to point B to point C, and just brings you along with it.
I
Um,
think. Oh, pardon me.
well, no, go ahead. I think.
I was going to say that, I think that one thing that could have bogged down the film was excessive exposition. Trying to explain everything that was weird about Dune and ad infinitum. And I was grateful that it didn't occur because, in some ways, it's crediting the audience with the intelligence to figure things out for themselves, maybe even if they haven't read the book. And I read it so long ago that, I can't even. I mean, there are obviously certain tropes I remember about the book, but, I don't remember every detail. And, um, and I did not feel that there was confusion about which characters were which. You know, um, it was quite clear throughout. And so I was grateful for Villeneuve giving the viewer credit for um, having the intelligence to figure it out. I also want to say that I think this is a movie that is best seen in a theater as opposed to on a TV screen. I mean, I have to admit, I was grateful we got to see it on IMAX.
Yeah,
I saw the first one, I think, on a large screen, but it was not IMAX. But the IMAX also has the quality of being totally immersive because you're
right,
just surrounded and the sound penetrates you, and especially the thumpers for the
right.
sandworms. and, you know, uh, I will say, if I have to offer criticism, I will say in the final assault of the Harkonnen on the Harkonnen stronghold, it was hard for me to tell who was on which side. I didn't think their uniforms were distinct enough
Mm,
to be able to tell, but I just went with it. I thought, well, we'll see how it all pans out. And then there were some close ups of people we knew fighting, and, that was okay too. But I do think it, um, you know, um, in that way, it reminded me of one of the flaws of Heaven's Gate, where there's this final battle going on where you don't know who is who. I mean, it's just craziness,
yeah.
and so it would have been nice to have it be a little clearer. But and of course, I will admit that I love the actress Charlotte Rampling's performances, and I think she's a great actress. And I wish there had been more of her in the movie, but I can understand that she's not a pivotal plot point.
Yeah. So I do think that is an interesting point you bring up with one of the downsides with the whole style, which, as I said, I find completely immersive, but there is a somewhat monochromatic um, aspect to the way that this Dune is done, and that does create some issues with distinguishing, like in the fight scenes, between who is who. It can get a little like, well, wait a minute, at times. I think that's a really good point. I also think it was a bit of an issue in the gladiatorial scene, uh, where Fade Routha is like in the pit fighting, and the crowd around him, they look like I mean, they're a computer generation, but they look like it.
Oh, yes, definitely. That was poorly done. But
Yeah,
the arena scene itself was fine, but the little
yeah,
specks in the arena.
the little people. I mean, you can't help but look at it and just say it looks like I'm watching a video game right there, like the people in the arena. Um, yeah, and then for me, it was just difficult, the casting choice of Christopher Walken as the Emperor. Uh,
Oh,
it's not that Christopher Walken is a bad actor, but he he is, he's got that sort of, East Coast accent. He's somebody if you've been watching over the years, and he's so identified with these kind of, mobster mafioso roles, and then seeing him suddenly like the Emperor of Dune, like it. I can only think of the Saturday Night Live skit where they do Christopher Walken, uh, it, trying out for the Han Solo role when they're casting for Star Wars, and that's what I see when I see him in the Emperor role. Like, that's what comes to mind for me. I can't get my mind out of that, and that does break me from the immersion of the film a bit. Seeing, him in that role, like I just, it didn't work for me. Um, I
I
think I
just thought of a.
also,
Go ahead.
this one is not nearly as disruptive as Christopher Walken, but I just don't entirely, I just don't really entirely buy Zendaya as Chani. Um, I'm not saying that, I'm not saying she's a bad actress, but I don't know. She somehow, I think they could have found somebody else who I would have I would have believed more than I did.
I did not feel there was much chemistry between Timothy Chalamet and Zendaya. And in
Yeah,
fact, I think if I had another criticism, it would be that that romance was somewhat distracting. I mean, it's part of the story, but it's so poorly developed, I think, that I just thought it could almost have been left out. And we see her at the end walking away. And, after he agrees to marry Princess Irulan, to solidify the alliance. And I just thought, well, there's a throwaway scene, to have her walk off like that. And, it just didn't do anything for me.
Yeah. And then I'm going to throw one last gripe in, which is, again, as I say, overall, I just found it completely enthralling. But one of the other things that did sort of take me out of it a little bit was when the Paul Atreides character um, starts coming to, you know, his awakening, as it were, um, and he presents himself to the Fremen. He just starts screaming and raving like a madman. It's like, dude, you are supposed to be the Messiah. Like, even if you're a Messiah leading um, some kind of holy war, you don't go around like, you know, shrieking like like you're about to, to where you're like almost spitting out your anger and rage and hostility. Like, I am the, you're supposed to just be, be this being of power that everybody is just magnetized to following. But again, that's my opinion. I'm sure others may disagree, but that was my feeling about it.
Well, yeah, because obviously these pieces of the story have to go the way they go, or you're creating a whole another story. And so you're right. How they're portrayed is as much as important as uh, continuing on. And that I have to admit that ranting was a bit much, but at least we knew we were getting to a certain point of the story by then. So I tended to overlook it, I think, in preparation for the final assault and the use of the forbidden atomic weapons. Um, and I guess we've just used spoilers all through this, but if you haven't seen the movie, I guess don't watch this review or read the book, I
So,
should say.
so on a scale of 1 to 5, what would you be inclined to give this one?
Oh, I think I would give it a 4.5. I think there were some things, as I said, that I did not care for, but overall, its sweep is incredible, and I think it does justice to the Frank Herbert story, and is well worth watching by anyone.
Yep, I'm in. That's exactly the rating that I was going to give it as well. 4.5 out of 5. As I say, a few niggling things that took me out of the immersion. I think maybe I hadn't bothered me as much with part one that did bother me with part two. But overall, the whole thing, one and two, the whole thing just flows together. It's just um, such a worthwhile experience. Really something you don't need to get heavy into critiquing. It's the sort of thing that you just sit back and go with it. So
It's a great tribute to Denis Villeneuve and his ability to direct an epic.
so I think that would be our thoughts on Dune Part Two. And thank you all for watching Slice of Sci-Fi.
Goodbye.